What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Roots. So I'm going to review the fifth album by metal band Sepultura. Basically, this project is called Chaos AD, and it came out in the fall of 1993. Now, this album was a pretty big deal internationally. It definitely did a lot of damage across the globe as far as that pitch kind of happened. It's a little bit early for the United States to kind of catch on. They caught on more with like the Roots album from 1996, but this album was a big deal back in the early mid 90s just because this was an album responsible for helping to kick off new metal as far as that pitch kind of particularly kind of happened. The album Roots was also a big deal with new metal as far as that kind of particularly kind of happened. The album Roots was also a big deal with new metal as far as that kind of particularly kind of happened, but I would have to say this was a pretty awesome album. In a lot of ways, this is a pretty rave album. This album is a big deal out of the 90s decade with metal music, and I would also have to say it's probably one of the better albums out of the first half of the 90s from just rock music in general. So this album is a pretty big deal. This is definitely a pretty relatively revolutionary album. This is one of those ones, kind of particularly like when you think of Smashing Pumpkins, 1991 or 1994 albums, some of those type ones. Nirvana's 1993 album, Alice in Chains' 1992 album, Green Day's 1994 album, some of those type ones. This one was a pretty big deal. No Doubt's 1995 album, Tragic Kingdom. This is one of the bigger deal of an album. I mean, between this one as to which one was better, in regards to which one is better, Chaos AD or Roots from 1996, I'd probably say that this one probably edges out Roots, even though Roots probably had a more composed and kind of cultivated type sound, I would have to suppose. But both these are pretty crazy. Like, the thing about Sepultura is they definitely have some carnivorous type vibes. They're definitely pretty carnage when it comes to this stuff, just in terms of their overall band work and vocals as far as that pitch kind of particularly kind of happens. Now in the United States, these guys didn't quite chart as heavily, I'd have to say, but internationally they were kind of a big deal, and especially in like the UK really seemed to like these folks as far as that pitch kind of happened. Now this was the second to last album that Max Cavalera did with this was the second to last Sepultura album that Max Cavalera did with Sepultura. I'd have to suppose he did move on to Soulfly, which I'm going to get to some of their stuff down the road as far as that pitch can happen. But this is definitely some kind of rooted, kind of groove metal type stuff. It has touches of new metal in there, but I'd have to say the thing about this particular album, I haven't listened to much Sepultura prior to this one. I know they've been around since like the 80s and such, but I would have to say I want to listen to some more of those. But this is like some groove metal type stuff matched with some new metal as far as that pitch kind of particularly kind of happens. Groove metal suits them pretty well, I definitely have to suppose. I did like Roots quite a bit. I own that album. It's a pretty good album just within the pitch that. I don't know a ton of Sepultura albums. I also own Sepultura's Against album from 1998 with their new vocalist, which I think is like Derek something, something like that. I know he did some good work with Sepultura as far as that pitch kind of happens, but this is definitely a pretty crazed album. I would definitely have to suppose. Definitely going to get an above average score, I would definitely feel like. So it's just kind of the pitch. For 1993, this is pretty awesome. I definitely would have to say in terms of that relative pitch, just because things were kind of more ancient, or just more things were just kind of more retro back in 1993 as far as that pitch kind of happened with this. I definitely have to say there's some good metal on here. The thing about Sepultura is they're pretty gnarled and carnivorous. Like I was saying, they have some definite mosh pit type energy and just some overall great stuff to kind of happen just within like a very gnarled kind of pitch, just with plenty of good energy to kind of have with some of that. If you like Metallica, if you like folks like that, if you like a little bit of the craze, just the kind of sludge like feel of like Alice in Chains with some of the gnarled craziness of Metallica, just the riffage, like the guitarist and drummer on Sepultura on the Chaos AD album are nothing to play with. I would definitely have to suppose they have some really excellent band work. I would have to say this is just some pretty shred like craziness, and overall the instrumentation on this particular album is just off the meter. So they definitely had some pretty pitch energy. Max Cavalera is pretty rave and just with his energy, so he's definitely probably one of the more crazed vocalists of like rock bands in recent times. I'd have to suppose that he has a pretty carnivorous pitch. So there's just some good stuff on here. The band just does excellent. It's just got some good stuff. It's just a few minor amounts of songs. That's pretty much one of the few reasons why this album's not going to get a 10 or a 9 or something like that. But it is pretty close to that, I'd have to suppose. Definitely a pretty heralded type album, I'd have to say. But we'll get into it so you know what I'm talking about. So basically, there's 3 singles off this album. None of these really charted in the United States, but they were pretty good internationally, like I was saying. So the first one is Refuse Resist, and this one's like Refuse Resist is a pretty viral tribal rager with shredding energy. I'd have to say it's got great band work, definitely, and it does some this song is definitely some mosh damage. I would have to say mosh pit damage, and this is just like this song is just a later hangout kind of gem, I'd have to suppose. So this is a pretty highlighted one. I would definitely feel like this. Really like the concept of it. This is pretty entry one. This is probably the most commercial type one for Sepultura. The thing about Sepultura is they were never really that commercial. I think they were more of like an international band. In the United States, they never really charted that heavily, I'd have to suppose. But this is a pretty commercial ready type one for the most. I mean, it's not commercial in terms of something you're going to hear next to like Alice in Chains and Metallica and some of those pitches, but definitely for like tribal kind of more, definitely for like an international band, this is a pretty commercial type one that just had like some relatively sheared through and kind of attempt at public relations as far as that pitch kind of happens. Just the riffage just really feels like some pretty gnarled kind of dungeon-like music for some hangout fare circa 1993, early 94 as far as that pitch kind of happens with this. So it's a pretty nice one. Definitely like the concept. There's a lot of hangout songs on here, a lot of good backyard kind of energy, just a lot of good pitches to kind of have for like some den-like music, dungeon-like music like Metallica can do at times. This is kind of a little bit of taste of like doom metal with groove metal with some of that type of stuff and early new metal as far as those pitches kind of happen with it. Definitely like the concept of some of these. A lot of these are just great for just like hanging out, just kicking it on couches, PlayStation going, things like that. Those kind of pitches, watching Jackass, just kind of getting crunk, having shots of Jim Beam, some of those type pitches, pizza being ordered, some of those type things. There's some real good pitches kind of have within that. There's some real good pitches kind of have within that aspect that I had to say. But Territory is more of a hangout song. This is the second single. This is definitely a pretty highlighted one. This is like a superb kind of chugging. This one's like a superb kind of chugging dungeon-like doom music. I would have to say definitely like this one. This one has some great demonic riffage on there and drum work. I would definitely feel like, so this is a pretty killer one, I'd have to say, and this is just a hangout kicker. So this one, more hangout music, not quite as commercial as like Refuse Resist, and Refuse Resist is not necessarily commercial, but it just is by Sepultura's standards, I want to say, just within that pitch. But I'd have to say this one's a little bit more of like a hangout tune. Riffage is a little bit more shredding on this particular one. This one's a little bit more of a hardcore song for their particular bass as far as that pitch kind of happens, but this is still a pretty highlighted one. This is definitely a good 1-2 punch to get these two singles, Refuse Resist and then Territory, to kind of get some of these. These are definitely some nice ones. So yeah. The third single is Slave New World. This is another highlighted one. This is like a crazed kind of mosh pit fare, I'd have to say, at least in the first pit. This is like a crazed mosh pit fare, I'd have to say, at least in the first verse, I'd have to suppose. This is like a dark kind of shrouded hangout times of a song, definitely. It's just more outdoor wise than this particular song is more outdoor wise, I'd have to say, but it's a great get crunk song. So I definitely like the particular pitch of this one. The riffage on all these songs are just particularly crazy. Like I was saying, the band just does an excellent job with this particular stuff. Max Cavalera is pretty great on this particular album, so it's just some good pitches to kind of get this stuff. Just a real kind of, this one's just a shorter song, just kind of a more pitch type one to just kind of having like some kind of mosh type energy and just kind of more demonic hangout type times, just for backyard sessions, smoke sessions, some stuff like that, just kind of kicking it outside in the summer as far as that kind of stuff kind of happens. But it's just some good concepts to kind of get. All three of the singles do pretty well. These are all great. These are all just great. These are all just great hangout type tunes, whether indoor, outdoor, some pitches like that. These are just some excellent ones. So I'd have to say that's basically the concept of the singles of this particular album. It's compacted just within the sense that I feel like this was kind of the album before the album. I still am not wholesomely sure as to why Max Cavalera kind of left Sepultura. I'm still not wholesomely sure as to why Max Cavalera left Sepultura, but I would have to say I'm glad that there's two separate bands now. There's Sepultura with the new vocalist, and then there's Soulfly with Max Cavalera. So you basically get two bands. It's kind of what happened with Foo Fighters and Nirvana and that sort of stuff. This within that pitch, it's kind of a good concept. But yeah, there's basically some good stuff on here. A lot of this is pretty rave and carnivorous, like hangout type music. So we'll get to some of these. So basically, there's 13 songs on this particular album. I'm reviewing the edition, the American edition, that also has the extra song that was on the Mortal Kombat soundtrack, which is Chaos BC. So that's the 13th song on here, I'd have to suppose. So out of those 13 songs, I want to recommend to you 9. So we'll go ahead and recommend those. So they would be Refuse Resist. So they'd be Refuse Resist, Territory, Slave New World, Propaganda, Amen, Biotech is Godzilla, Nomad, Clench Fist, and Chaos BC. So talk about some of these. Like the bonus song on here, Chaos BC, is a pretty excellent one. Definitely enjoyed this one. This is like a tribal kind of electro dance rager of a song, I'd have to say. This is industrial sounding, and by industrial, I mean industrial metal. Definitely the sort of stuff that Marilyn Manson, Power Man 5000, some of those folks kind of do. For 1993, this is pretty pitched because this was kind of before the techno craze of like the mid-late 90s as far as that kind of happened. So this is a pretty revolutionary type one. This song is rave ready, and it's just great for like a thrilling kind of night outing, I'd have to suppose. So this is a pretty good highlight. Definitely recommend getting the version of the album that has this particular song on there. I think by this point it would probably have like the bonus song edition, so is this a good one to kind of get, Chaos BC. Another pretty good highlight is Biotech is Godzilla. This is like a super kind of gnarled mosh. Biotech is Godzilla is like a super gnarled kind of mosh berserkness of a song, I'd have to say. This song is just a pitch of night fair to listen to at a shindig, I would have to suppose. This is just a real great one to listen to at 1:30, 2:30 a.m., something like that. The pitch of like the craziness of like a night party, something like that. Just a nightclub, something of that sort of pitch. This one just has real real riveting kind of mosh energy, and the energy of this song is just off the meter, I'd have to suppose. So this is definitely pretty gnarly one. It's a pretty short song. This is like a minute and a half, something around that, less than 2 minutes, I'd have to suppose, but it's just a pretty craze type one. Really, Sepultura, just the whole album really has some pretty gnarled type energy. They're pretty known for their boisterous and kind of just carnivorous type tone, but I'd suppose this is one of the most gnarled ones. It's just a real snappy song just to kind of have for that pitch, just for that pitch of some mosh type energy as far as that kind of happens with it. And I'd say another nice one that has some pretty good shredding on here is Propaganda. This is a pretty highlighted one. This is like a shred crazy. Propaganda is like a shred crazy kind of mosh damage of a song. I'd have to say this is an excellent kind of party starter. I would definitely feel like, and this is just a 90s metal gem, definitely. It's a high octane boiler, and this song is just overall, this is just a high octane boiler, I would have to say, and this song is just overall riveting. So this is a pretty highlighted one. This one's pretty similar to like Refuse Resist. Propaganda and tone is pretty similar to Refuse Resist, and Territory has that same gnarled type riffage as far as those particular songs kind of get. So that's some nice ones to kind of have. Those are just a 1-2-3 kind of punch as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. This would have to definitely kind of say so. There's some good highlighted ones just within the standard riffage of just getting some of those type ones. Just great for some backyard parties and just overall hangout sessions just with some of those type energy, I'd have to suppose. That's a nice one. Another pretty good pitch of one to kind of have is Amen. This is definitely a pretty good backyard party type craze of a song, I'd have to suppose. This is a pretty good backyard party craze of a song, I'd have to suppose. This is like a doom-like kind of song. The song is doom-like and has gnarled energy about it. I'd have to say this is a great get cranked kind of song, I'd have to feel like, and it's just a thrilling kind of summer vibes that this song kind of has for being out. And this song just has some thrilling kind of summer vibes for out and about, I'd have to suppose. So it's a pretty nice one. Yeah, like a lot of these hangout songs are pretty crazy to kind of get just within a gnarled kind of backyard session as far as that pitch kind of happens. These are just some great songs for like some summer fare. I definitely had to suppose the riffage is just real easy to mellow out to and zone out to, but then at the same time kind of get crunk to and sip some beers to and things like that. Have some hard liquor, some things like that. Just some good pitches to kind of get with some of those. A lot of just pretty just overall gnarled energy, just some great pitches. Amen and Slave New World are pretty similar type ones to kind of have within that pitch. Propaganda similar to Territory and Refuse and Resist. That's some good ones for that. Clenched Fist is a pretty nice one. This is kind of a glaring autumn tune for like social and dap fare. I'd have to definitely say this is a pretty good dap song just within that pitch. It's an easy kind of get crunk gem, definitely, I would feel like, and the riffage just goes nuts on this particular song and it shreds pretty well. So this is a pretty highlighted one. Definitely reminds me of something that Korn would do just with like a more turned up and gnarled kind of energy about it. So this one just has like the shredding craziness that Sepultura is known for, just with like a pitch of Korn in there, despite the fact that this album came out a year before Korn was really out. So it's a good kind of pitch to kind of get this particular one. Just some real gnarled kind of craze type energy just within an autumn sense. Now this album is kind of more metal, more so than like kind of industrial kind of sound that like Korn and Marilyn Manson kind of have, and some of that type stuff, new metal type stuff as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. But it is some good stuff just within that relative aspect that there probably could have stood to have been a few more songs like Clench Fist just within that glaring kind of tone, just an overall more haunting type fare. But I definitely like it. I mean, most of the riffage on here could probably be played in the autumn just because of how gnarled it is. That's some good concepts. But then I'd have to say Nomad is another highlight. This is like a dungeon-like metal tune with like a heavy doom sound. I definitely feel like this is a vanilla hangout night, definitely. This is definitely good for a vanilla hangout night. I'd have to say this is a steady smoke session night, definitely, and I would feel like this is a pretty overall ill song. So this is a pretty nice one. This is pretty similar to like some Metallica type stuff, just with the pretty just chugging along type riffage as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. But this is just some great hangout type fare, pretty similar to Propaganda and Territory. I would definitely feel like this is Nomad is very similar to Territory just within that pitch. So it's a good gnarled type one. So Nomad is a good gnarled type one to kind of get for the pitch of this particular album as far as that kind of happens. There's just plenty of these on here. This album's chock full. This album's just chock full with these particular type hits. So some good stuff on here. So talk about some of the songs I don't recommend on here, which would just basically be 4 of these. Basically some of these, like there's a good string of these towards the end of the album, I'd have to suppose. They kind of ran out of energy towards the end, which is just songs like We Who Are Not As Others, Manifest, and The Hunt. Basically, The Hunt was just kind of a poor, cover song as far as that particularly kind of happened. It was just not one I really enjoyed that much or could really see the riffage as far as listening to it. Just did not have compelling kind of instrumentation work on here. I think because this was a cover song, it had to kind of somewhat be kind of structural to like the Hunt kind of had to have a structure similar to like the cover song that it was getting it from. So it was just kind of the pitch that just wasn't a good meshing of like a song to kind of have on that. It was just not a good amalgamation of one to try to do with that. And then Manifest and We Who Are Not As Others were just kind of poor ones. These are both songs that kind of took a while to start up as far as that pitch kind of happened with it. Just didn't really like the arrangement side. I mean, I like the instrumentation of the I like the instrumentation of these particular songs in like a certain light, but not wholesomely enough to really recommend them as much as that kind of pitch kind of went with it. These were just not quite as highlighted of ones as far as that was kind of going with it. Just didn't quite have the arrangements as far as what I was looking for. I mean, there were decent kind of instrumentals, but just not solid enough to really recommend as far as that kind of having. The vocals were just not on there heavy enough, and they just didn't really have as much, just not quite as much ambience and overall like gnarledness and just overall quality as much as the rest of the album kind of did. And then there was like a fifth song on here, and then there's a fourth song I don't recommend on here called Kiowas. I would have to say didn't really like this one. This was just an instrumental, but it was just a poor instrumental. Didn't really like the arrangements of this particular one. It was just kind of more of like a more homely type song. At least the pitch behind it was just not quite as gnarled. I was expecting in terms of an instrumental from Sepultura as gnarled and crazy as they normally get, something that would have been shred heavy and just an overall mosh pit kind of craziness that they are known for. But this one was just kind of like a more kind of tapioca type one that just didn't really have a good pitch overall to kind of have with it. It was just kind of a more vanilla type one that was just not that interesting or really anything to really head nod to or really get crunk to, something like that. So that one was just kind of a plain instrumental that just didn't really work that well. It was just not very enjoyable, I have to suppose. Me recommending me recommending 9 songs out of 13 on this particular album. I'm going to go ahead and give this album like an 8.75 out of 10. Just barely missed the 9 out of 10 score, I'd have to suppose. Definitely had some good pitches on here. The energy is just off the meter, just full of plenty of gnarled craziness. I would definitely have to suppose. Just the pitch of this album is just off the meter in terms of overall craziness. Just plenty of good stuff to kind of have. The riveting singles, some hangout gems, definitely some good stuff to kind of have for that sort of stuff. Smoke out sessions, just some excellent smoke out sessions, some hangout sessions, some vanilla hangout sessions, just some good stuff to kind of have. The riff is just easy to listen to and just some good stuff to kind of hear just within that pitch. Very melodic, just riff heavy, crazy, just very riff heavy, crazed. Drum work is excellent. Just plenty of melodic type tunes on here. The vocals are excellent. Just some good stuff to kind of get. The social score, I'm going to go ahead and give the social score like a 10 out of 10 just because I feel like the aspect behind this is just, I would say this is just a pretty popular album to kind of mess with. This is a seminal album out of the 90s as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. Just some great singles on here, some international appeal, some things like that. The hangout fare is just really excellent off the meter, I would have to suppose. There's plenty of good stuff to kind of get mosh to, smoke to, drink to, some stuff like that. Has some good times. Great hangout sessions as far as that pitch kind of happens, whether it's indoor, outdoor, just at festivals, things like that, some concert music, so just some overall good stuff to kind of have. This is just your loud pack to kind of have just for some hangout sessions with your pals as far as that pitch kind of happens. So it definitely gets a 10 out of 10 social. In terms of the future, like Sepultura has not put out an album since 2020, but supposedly there's going to be an album that supposedly Sepultura is on the verge of retiring, so that's not too good as far as that pitch kind of happens. But they do have an album that's supposedly coming out in 2024 somewhere, so that's some good pitches kind of get with that. But this is basically a pretty excellent album here. Just barely missed getting a 9 or a 10 out of 10 as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. The energy's off the meter. This is just a social kind of classic in terms of the pitch that it had. This is a seminal 90s album, and I just highly recommend it.